Type is power. The power to express words and ideas visually. It's timeless, but always changing. And that's what we're going to explore. Most people agree that the creator of typography was a German man named Johannes Gutenberg, and yes, he wore a hat like that. Before Gutenberg came along and revolutionized the world of communication, books needed to be scribed by hand, usually by monks, which was very time-consuming and expensive. So Gutenberg created blackletter, the first ever typeface, modeled after the writing of the scribes. Blackletter has thick vertical lines and thin horizontal connectors, which made it great for scribing, but it looked very dense and squished together when printed. Something needed to change. Enter Roman type. This particular typeface is Cambria, which you're probably used to seeing on your word processor, but the first ever Roman typeface was created in the 15th century by the Frenchman Nicolas Jenson. This is his typeface right here. Jenson worked mainly in Venice, Italy, and was inspired by the lettering found on ancient Roman buildings. His letter forms were based on straight lines and regular curves. This made them very clear and legible compared to the dense darkness of blackletter. This legible new typeface was an instant success, and quickly spread across Europe, riding on the coattails of the Renaissance. The next major innovation in typography after Roman letters was italics, which are like slanted and stylized versions of Roman type. They were created in the late 15th century by Aldus Manutius from Italy as a way of fitting more letters onto the page and saving money. Now we use italics interspersed in Roman type for emphasis. Aldus Manutius also created the modern comma and semicolon, but that's another story. Type development stayed fairly stagnant until the 18th century in England, when William Caslon created a typeface that set a new standard for legibility. Well, it wasn't anything radical, it was just what the world was looking for. The style of Caslon's typeface is now referred to as Old Style. A few decades later, another Brit named John Baskerville created a new variety of typeface, which we call transitional. Later still, a Frenchman named Didot and an Italian named Bodoni created typefaces that we have classified as modern. Most serif typefaces fit into one of these three categories, but what does each category mean? An old-style typeface has letters that have thick serifs and low contrast between thick and thin strokes. A transitional typeface has letters with thinner serifs and a higher contrast between thick and thin strokes. And a modern typeface has letters with very thin serifs and extreme contrast between thick and thin strokes. Next, William Caslon's great-grandson, named William Caslon IV, got sick of all of these serifs, so he decided to remove them entirely and made a new kind of typeface, called a sans serif. It didn't catch on immediately, but would eventually get really big. During the Second Industrial Revolution, advertising created a need for new typefaces. Letters were made taller and wider, mainly used in large sizes on posters and billboards. Things got pretty weird, but one happy result of all of this experimentation is Egyptian, or slab serif. It has really thick serifs and is usually used for titles. As a backlash to the complexity found in typefaces of the 19th century, the early 20th century brought something simple. Paul Renner from Germany created a typeface called Futura, and it was based on simple geometric shapes. This is called the geometric sans. Around the same time, a British man named Eric Gill created a typeface called Gill Sans that was similar to a geometric sans, but with gentler, more natural curves, and this is called a humanist sans. The next major step in the world of sans serifs happened in Switzerland in 1957 with the introduction of Helvetica. It has simple curves and is available in many different weights, and some would call it the world's favorite typeface. The world of typography changed forever with the introduction of the computer. There were a few difficult years of crude pixel type due to the primitive screen technology. But then technology evolved and computers began to allow for the creation of thousands of beautiful typefaces. And the odd dud. But now anyone has the freedom to create their own unique typeface. And that is the history of typography.
Typography is such an important tool that an artist can use for successful visual communication. First up, we're going to recap the styles of fonts you learned about in the video. A sans serif font includes your most simplistic and minimal details. If you take your basic sans serif font and add on feet, those feet can be viewed as serif or slab serif elements. Now, besides these three main categories of fonts, there's also many other styles. If you're creating a style similar to cursive, many times that's considered script. And if you add a lot of extra details, that's usually called a decorative font. Now, let's imagine a stop sign with its sans serif font is replaced with a different type of writing, and instead you view a script font. It's amazing how just changing the lettering style completely changes how you view an item. Let's see what happens if we change the lettering style on these popular social media brands. By changing the style of font, the typography element, it can make you enjoy an item or avoid it. A whole different feeling can be created. Now, there are so many art careers where your sole focus would be creating lettering styles and combining them together in graphic forms of visual communication. What we're going to be doing for this project is take inspiration from typography and create a word plus an object into our own custom font. It is going to be your job to pick an object, create the shape of the object, then fill the implied space of that shape with the name of that item. And how you write that name should be in an interesting and creative font. Now, this project will require quite a bit of creativity and imagination as you combine your lettering typeface within the shape of your object. Now, as you're doing so, make sure to consider the use of line, shape, pattern, and color, and how those elements of art can help reinforce your visual communication of your design. For this project, I'm using an 8 by 8 inch square piece of paper, but please feel free to use whatever size paper you have available. Along with pencil, you are welcome to include any other artistic materials. For my object, I was inspired by a roll of toilet paper. So I'm going to be sketching this object, then filling the inside space with lettering or typeface. I'm going to walk through some of the steps I use that I found very helpful while working on this project. First up, I'm sketching out the shape of my object using lightly drawn lines. I call these lines whisper lines because they barely graze across the page and they're super easy to erase. After mapping out my initial shape, I can then go through and start adding in my writing inside of the object. Now, whenever I am writing out a word inside of a specific space, I find it very helpful to plan ahead. So I look at how many letters are within the word I'm trying to spell, and then I pick the middle letter of the word and I place that in the middle area of my section. I draw with light whisper lines as I'm sketching out my placement. Then I'll go back and I'll finish with my details later. I found that this planning method works really nice because then I'm not drawing a beautiful letter, having to go back, completely erase it because it's in the wrong spot. It's too big or it's too small. So mapping out my letters, lightly drawn lines, then going through and adding in my unique font is the steps I'm taking to achieve this project. I'm also using quite a bit of problem solving as I'm creating my artwork because I'm not quite sure how I want my piece to look. So I am making choices as I go that I think will help improve the overall appearance of my art piece. As you're working on this project today, think about the use of color. Would color be helpful for your art and to help it be easily identifiable of what you're creating, help with your visual communication, perhaps outlining in Sharpie, or maybe adding some shading or even patterns could be very successful on this project. For my toilet paper object, I decided to give a shadow to each of my letters. Then I'm going to add in some unique lines so that your eye will travel up and around the toilet paper roll.